Alright, so obviously today's story or video must be something special because I haven't done an intro in what feels like forever. This story was actually submitted to me and asked if I would like to narrate it. I've held on to it for a little while, and I'm sorry, right-angled trapezoid, that I have. I just wasn't sure how to approach it or when I would be able to actually use it. This story is a very detailed dream by said person, right-angled trapezoid, and while it doesn't necessarily fit in with my other stories, I still kind of wanted to read it just because it was such an interesting story, and dreams can be supernatural or paranormal in their nature. So I wanted to just cover this and read the story and just kind of let it soak into you guys. Let you guys soak in the story, the dream, and then do with that what you will, I guess. So I know, like I said, I haven't done intros in a while, and I know this feels really weird right now. I really liked this post, and they asked me if I'd be interested in it, and my modus operandus on this channel is interesting stories. It's not always paranormal, it's not always creepy, it's interesting stories, and I think this one fits into that category very well. So with that said, here is A Chemical World, A Dream by Right-Angled Trapezoid. Enjoy. If it were an art show, it had surpassed any postmodern installation exhibit I have ever seen, in that it actually succeeded in being odd without trying to be. There were neon lights coming up through the floor that turned into a glowing gelatinous substance once they reached about 4 feet above the ground. On the walls, there were unnaturally brightly colored pictures made out of the same unusual material that constantly changed like a video, only these were not videos. Most of the time, these pictures looked as though they were made of light, but sometimes this light took the form of other materials, such as what I interpreted to be liquefied plexiglass. Patterns would lay over themselves, creating unusual colors and continuing to shift. Most of this artwork was not beautiful at all. The patterns were busy and plaid-like when in straight lines and right angles, and I only saw glimpses of aesthetically pleasing colors before they were interrupted by louder ones. The pictures and lights were so abrasive that I could only look at them so long before feeling dizzy and disoriented. When the patterns were not angular, they resembled wavy, cylindrical tubes in all sorts of colors, mainly orange and pink. The intrusive quality of the exhibit made me feel as though I were on another planet, with a drastically different chemical makeup from Earth. And I was physically unwell in such an environment. Much of the work on display would actually project outward from the walls into the viewer's face. So much was going on that the only thing lacking was subtlety. After some time, I found myself wandering back and forth between a street fair, which contained booths run by artistic scientists, whose endeavor was to demonstrate how to use the gelatinous neon material, and inside of a house with dark wooden floors. I noticed that many of the booths outside were designed for young children. The demonstrations held for adults were clearly unsafe, and they brought to my attention that the odd substance these people were working with was toxic. I asked one of the scientists in charge of the booth if the material was used for the children were the same, and unfortunately they were. My uneasiness grew as I perused the fair. I enjoyed the calm atmosphere within the house, but couldn't ignore my festering anxiety. The room I was standing in was on the ground floor. Just ahead of me was a screen door which led to the backyard. To my immediate left was a stairway that led to the basement, and beside it, also to my left, was a hallway leading back to a room lit by a faint orange incandescent light. The time of day was dusk. Tiny vibrations pulsated beneath my feet, accompanied by a quick succession of sharp clanking sounds, and I saw, coming from the faintly lit hallway, a group of insects made of a beautiful, silvery metallic material. These ants and scorpions were not shiny, but opalescent, and measured about 10 inches long. They walked toward my general direction, seemingly oblivious of my presence. I was surprised at myself for not being put off or startled by them. In fact, I went to get a closer look. not only to study them in detail and enjoy their beauty, but also determine whether they were sentient beings or mobile sculptures. The ants definitely had wills of their own. They could accelerate quickly, which made me nervous, and seemed to be looking for something. The scorpions were similar, but seemed more aimless. Their tails' movements were like those of fish. That is, if fish had metallic spears at the end of theirs. The legs of each of these insects tapered into a needle's width of a point, and upon realizing the sharpness of their limbs, I began to dislike the rapid tapping sounds they made as they scurried across the hardwood floors. I then discovered that the ants appeared to have far more than 6 legs, which made me wonder what they were. The beauty of these creatures, however, deterred me from walking away from them despite their dangerous appearance. I wanted very much to know what they were made out of and to study them closely. As I was observing the surface of one of the ant-like beings, whose head was an almost perfect sphere, I noticed me for the first time. At first glance, the head and body had a matte surface, but after a closer inspection, the surface looked like mother of pearl covered in oil slicker, encased by the skin of a soap bubble. The swirling, iridescent colors were constantly moving in layers. The creature lifted its head toward my face. Its tiny black eyes were so dark that there was no way to tell exactly where they were focusing. It stepped back as if preparing to lunge at me, and sure enough it did. It swiped at my shin using one of its numerous front legs, which produced the sound of knives sharpening as it brushed against its other legs. The metal against metal noises increased as the other creatures gathered around me in formation. I ran through the screen door, eventually winding up at the street fair once more. I returned to the scientific art fair booths and came across a man in his late 20s, with a crowd gathering around him. He wore a beat-up, old-fashioned brown top hat and a monocle, and performed magic tricks with the ubiquitous neon substance. He would juggle with it, make it disappear in his hands, cause it to somehow pass through his body, etc. All the children oohed and awed, bringing more attention to the show as the crowds passed by. Concerned for the safety of the public, I waited for the crowd to dissipate. When the man started packing up his equipment, I approached him to inquire if the neon substance was in fact toxic, as I had been told that it was earlier by someone in the crowd. He looked at me as though I was an imbecile and laughed. "Why should you waste your time worrying about safety? Such things don't even exist," he sneered imposingly. "Don't you have any idea how many toxic things we all come into contact with on a daily basis without even knowing it? You need to worry less and enjoy yourself more." As the eye behind his monocle drifted slowly off to the lateral side of his head, he grinned as if to tell me how amusing it was for him to have the rare opportunity to talk to someone as naive as I was. I could see that he derived sadistic pleasure from making me feel helpless. Although I was faint with fear, ready to collapse, I also wanted very much to slap him. My aggressive, self-preserving instincts took over, and I found the strength to demand as to the whereabouts of a competent doctor. I had come in contact with the substance during the art show and was not feeling well. Nevertheless, the man continued mercilessly. "So you want to take the blue pill, do you? I apologize for referring to the Matrix, but the analogy works too well," he sneered. "I want to know what I came in direct contact with, and I want to know how to detox from whatever it is if need be. I can see that you don't give two shits about your health, but I depend on mine. I don't know where the hell I am or how I wound up here, but I want to go home, and I want to get there in perfect shape. If I find out that I have toxic metals in my bloodstream, I'm going to hold you and everyone participating in this event accountable for reckless endangerment. Now tell me where I can find a doctor now." I knew that he wouldn't have even cared if I killed him. He was a drone, probably lost his sense of danger from playing with the unidentified substance. After many failed attempts to intimidate him, I at least got him to tell me where a doctor was. In a nearby tent, there was a medical crew that seemed legit. I told them of my concerns, and they reassured me that the substance was safe to use if handled properly. I told the crew that the art show was oozing with the material. Children and parents were touching it with their bare hands. No one wore protective gear, and that no one was warned about it before entering the exhibit. I can't remember what the crew told me after I reamed them out. I can only recall that they were infuriatingly calm about the whole thing. They did offer a detoxifying injection for me, given that I was distressed about my contact with the hazardous material. I asked them if they thought I should be concerned, and the doctor said, probably not, but it wouldn't hurt to be on the safe side. The injection was administered through a large brass-colored syringe into the heel of my foot. I braced myself, but surprisingly, the shot was painless. I wondered if the antidote was just as harmful as the substance, because I had lost some feeling in my leg and felt drugged soon afterward. The effects of the drug made me too groggy to worry as much as before, but the anxiety remained and continued to fester, although dulled considerably. I became aware of every vein in my body. I could feel them all pulsating, and had the sense that something undesirable was coursing through them. I was told that I would need a follow-up shot in a year. I found myself back at the house with the dark wooden floors, only I was in a kitchen on the second floor and had no recollection of entering the house. My dad was cooking something on a small stove, and I stood about 5 feet behind him. To our right was a large refrigerator, and to the left was a staircase leading down to the first floor, where the insect-like beings had been. I asked if he knew about the creatures and of the toxic material, and he said that he hadn't. I told him about the art and science fair and what had happened, and he didn't seem concerned at all. I let him know that I was afraid and continued to ask him questions about everything that was going on outside. He then told me that he had been communicating with his late mother, and although I was, in theory, intensely curious and excited to make contact with her, I couldn't get my concerns out of my mind long enough to experience these emotions. "Don't you care?" he asked coldly with his back turned, moving a spatula around a small saucepan. "Of course," I insisted. "I'm just really terrified about the stuff I touched, and I'm concerned about the people at the fair." Dad then muttered something and wandered off, bringing a tray of food with him upstairs. I was soon met with the foreboding sense that whomever he was going to visit upstairs was not my grandmother. It occurred to me that he could have been lying or hallucinating, but something told me that some outside force was tricking him. I felt this way because he behaved mechanically as though under a spell. I stood alone in the second-floor kitchen for a short moment, feeling utterly hopeless and alienated. I couldn't seem to communicate with anyone fully, no matter where I went. I felt strongly compelled to get out of the house immediately. I was almost certain the entity that Dad was about to visit was not the person he thought it was. I was more afraid that no one was there, however, than that an imposter or something horrible was waiting upstairs, because I didn't want to believe that my dad was losing his mind. I wanted to see my grandmother in her true form. I left the house as ambiguously as I had entered it, and was then wandering around a hilly field with inconsistent grass, some of which was long. I started off in a small marsh-like valley with long tufts of grass sticking out from each of its molehills. It was difficult to walk through this area of the field. Above me was a fenced-off basketball court, and I could hear the dribbling of balls and voices of male players. As I tried to climb up the main hill in order to see who these noisy players were, I was distracted by the molehills which suddenly glowed from within, catching my eye. Each little hill had a series of round glass windows behind which were glowing objects. Some resembled gelatin desserts, and others intensely detailed millefiori paperweights. They were all made from the toxic substance at the art fair. These displays were intriguing and beautiful, and I tried to closely study as many of them as I could, wishing I had created them, which ironically I had, being the dreamer of the entire landscape. Or had I? Sounds from above caused another distraction, and my attention shifted away from the hills to an area about 100 feet past the basketball court, which I never got to see. I climbed up the main hill, reached a vast and flattened area of the field with short grass, and saw from a distance what appeared to be a rugby game, played by a bunch of young, blonde-haired boys in their mid-teens. The field was so large that I wondered how I would find my way out of there once I was ready to go home, wherever home was. A long way past this game, I could see a couple hills and a stretch of highway, which was where I needed to go, apparently. I walked toward the boys, hoping to be able to walk around the game, but everywhere I turned, more players appeared, looking engaged, focused, and just ready to catch the ball. It didn't take me long to realize this was an immense game that took up the entire field, and there was no way to get to the highway without walking straight through it. My walk through this violent game was extremely unsettling, as none of the players seemed to be able to see me. I yelled at them numerous times to watch out as they stepped on my toes carelessly and shoved me unintentionally as I prodded on. The game was absolutely brutal, The boys slammed into one another, hit each other so hard with the ball that blood was drawn, etc. Despite all the yelling and violence, the players of this game retained poker faces, and when they were knocked over, they got up quickly as though they didn't feel any pain at all. One boy who had a particularly bloody face only emitted strategic code words to his team members, not the cries of someone that was injured. The game was seemingly endless. Walking through this abundance of violence felt like swimming in an ocean against the tide. I had to fight the urge to collapse so as to avoid getting trampled. Finally, I reached the small molehill beside the highway and saw a man lying on his back. I limped over to him and discovered that it was my friend Leo, who was clearly in agony. He was so thin that I could see every sinew in his body as he rocked back and forth with his head tilted, wincing in pain. His back was severely hunched and his shoulders were so far forward that he touched his ears and almost met one another in the middle of his chest. I knelt beside him, and a wave of sorrow washed over me as I struggled to look at him. "It's my shoulders," he moaned. "They're locked in place." I carefully placed my hands on each of his shoulders, one at a time, and moved them as much as they were capable, and throughout the process asking Leo frequently if what I was doing was hurting him. Thankfully, I wasn't making his condition any worse. After a long session of this improvised physical therapy, Leo cried tears of relief. To my surprise, about 5 of the boys from the violent rugby game started walking up the hill to see what was going on. As they approached, I could tell that they were genuinely concerned. Their former poker faces displayed genuine sympathy. I kept my eyes pointed toward the ground, pretending to not see the boys. Gradually, more and more of the rugby players stopped what they were doing to watch my suffering friend heal. The sensation was powerful. It was as though Leo and I had somehow fused together as a symbol of human kindness. So again, that was Chemical World by RightAngledTrapezoid. Probably the strangest dream story I've ever read. I don't frequent the Dreams subreddit, honestly. I probably should. In my opinion, this dream, the story written about this dream, definitely deserves a place among the stories that I read because, again, it's interesting. And that's always been my goal on this channel, to not necessarily be a creepy narrator, but to be an interesting narrator. Unfortunately, I do fall into the creepiness category a little more than I would like to, but it makes sense because that's what a lot of the content out there is, right? Nothing against it, just would like to talk about interesting stuff and read more sci-fi every once in a while, you know what I mean? That said, thank you to RightAngledTrapezoid for asking me to narrate this fantastic story. Honestly, really, really interesting dream, and I can't say I've ever had a dream this vivid and this strange. I've had some weird ones, though. Maybe someday I'll write some stories about the dreams I have, though a lot of the time my dreams end up being stupid. Anyway, what am I talking about? Alright, if you guys enjoyed this story and would like more content like this and content that is vastly different, please consider joining the Nevermore. To join the Nevermore, all you have to do, you lovely, lovely person, is move your mouse or your finger to the button that says subscribe, SUBSCRIBE. Press that button or click that button and then click the little bell next to it and select the all option. Or I guess personal, just don't ever select the none option. Though all would be the best, that way it tells you everything. Anyway, doing this makes you part of the Nevermore. Being part of the Nevermore gives you access to my Patreon, my Coffee, Twitter, subreddit, Facebook, merch store, and a submission page where you can submit a story to me if you have one you'd like me to read on my channel. You can technically access all this without being part of the Nevermore, but it's not as fun. Being part of the Nevermore makes accessing my stuff 100% more fun, based solely on my experience. If you have a similar experience, let me know. Did joining the Nevermore make things more fun for you? Just asking. Alright, friends. I hope you have a fantastic day and a fantastic rest of your week. I love you all. I will see you on the next video, but until then, sleep well.